She cleaned the floor in silence until a man said, "You saved me and don't know it. Welcome back and enjoy the story." Teresa had been cleaning that same corridor for 11 years. She knew every stain on the tile, every crack in the wall. And yet, no one knew her name. Not really. They just called her the cleaning lady, if they addressed her at all. She wore gloves with holes in the fingertips. Her knees ached every night. Her back had bent slightly over the years, like the world had pressed down on her and never let up. But she never stopped showing up. Because if I disappear, she thought, who would even notice? Doctors passed by. Nurses brushed past her mop. Patients didn't look her in the eye. Even the children avoided her shadow. She was just a piece of the hallway, a tool, a sound in the distance. She began to believe she didn't exist. But still, she whispered to herself every morning, do it with love, even if no one sees it. Especially if no one sees it. Then, one Thursday, as she scrubbed the floor outside the ER, she felt someone watching. A young man stood there, maybe 25. He was dressed well, too well to be a patient. He knelt beside her, his voice shaking. "Do you remember me?" She looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. I don't." He smiled. His eyes were full of tears. "You found me behind a dumpster when I was 10. I was shivering, burning with fever. You carried me here, wrapped me in your coat, stayed with me all night. I never even knew your name." Her heart froze. "I became a doctor," he said, "because of you. And today, I'm the head of this floor." He stood and raised his voice so the hallway could hear. "This woman saved my life. And no one ever thanked her." The nurses stopped. The doctors looked up. The world paused. He pulled out a small box. "You taught me to believe in kindness. I want you to lead our new human care program, with full salary, benefits, and your own office." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She cried right there in front of everyone who once passed her by. "I thought no one remembered me," she whispered. "I didn't know I mattered." And in that moment, all the years of silence shattered, replaced by applause, respect, and the sweet sound of her name finally being spoken with love. The fluorescent lights of Chicago Memorial Hospital hummed above Teresa Vargas as she pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor of the East Wing. At 57, her hands had grown rough and calloused from years of harsh chemicals, but they still moved with surprising gentleness as she worked. The night shift had always been hers, 3 p.m. to midnight, allowing her to move through the hospital, like a ghost, present but unseen. The doctors in their crisp white coats strode past without acknowledging her existence. The nurses, though sometimes kinder, were too busy to offer more than the occasional harried smile. Patients looked through her as if she were made of glass. Teresa had learned to make herself smaller over the years, pressing against walls when important people needed to pass, lowering her eyes when conversations happened nearby. She'd mastered the art of invisibility. Tonight felt different somehow. As she maneuvered her mop across the gleaming floor near the emergency room entrance, Teresa noticed a peculiar feeling like being watched. She glanced up, startled to find a young man observing her from several yards away. He stood tall in an expensive charcoal suit with a stethoscope draped casually around his neck. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her immediately uncomfortable. Teresa quickly lowered her gaze and continued mopping, hoping he would move along like everyone else, but his leather shoes appeared at the edge of her vision instead, stopping just short of her freshly cleaned floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Teresa's heart fluttered with anxiety. Had she done something wrong? Was he going to complain about her work? She placed her mop back in the bucket and straightened as much as her aching back would allow, finally meeting his gaze. "Yes, doctor," she said quietly, the words barely audible over the hospital's ambient noise. The young doctor, no more than 30, she guessed, studied her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, to her complete shock, he dropped to one knee before her, bringing himself to her eye level, disregarding his expensive suit against the hospital floor. "Do you remember me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. 15 years ago. Behind. The hospital. A boy with pneumonia. Teresa searched his face, confusion clouding her features. Something about his eyes seemed vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place him. "I'm sorry, doctor, I don't remember," she admitted, embarrassed by her failing memory. The young man's face broke into a tremulous smile as tears welled in his eyes. "You found me behind a dumpster when I was 10 years old," he explained. "I was hiding there after running away from my foster home. I had pneumonia, was burning with fever. You wrapped me in your coat and carried me inside. You stayed with me all night, holding my hand, talking to me about your home in Mexico until I fell asleep." Teresa gasped softly as forgotten memories suddenly rushed back. The skinny boy shivering violently in the cold Chicago winter, how light he had felt in her arms despite his age, his small hand clutching hers throughout the night. "You're that little boy?" she whispered in disbelief. "Austin." The doctor nodded, his smile widening. "Austin Phillips. I became a doctor because of what you did that night, and today—" He stood up, straightening his white coat. "I've been appointed as the new head of emergency medicine." Teresa felt tears forming in her own eyes now. 15 years she had worked in this hospital, 11 of them on this very floor, and she had never imagined that her small act of kindness had made such an impact. Before she could respond, Dr. Phillips turned toward the busy nurses' station and raised his voice. "Everyone, may I have your attention, please?" The bustling emergency room slowly quieted as heads turned toward them. Teresa wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows as she always did, but Austin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, keeping her anchored in place. "This woman," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, "saved my life 15 years ago. I was a homeless kid with pneumonia, and she found me behind this very building. She brought me in, stayed with me all night, and showed me more compassion than anyone ever had." He turned back to Teresa, whose cheeks burned with embarrassment. "And all these years no one ever thanked her. No one even knows her name." The entire emergency room staff stood frozen, doctors and nurses alike staring at the small woman they had walked past 1,000 times without a second glance. Teresa felt naked under their collective gaze, her hands fidgeting with the frayed edges of her worn uniform. Dr. Phillips reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, holding it out to her. "Teresa Vargas," he said formally, "I want you to lead our new patient comfort and human care program. Full salary benefits, your own office, no more midnight shifts, no more being invisible." Teresa stared at the box in his outstretched hand, unable to process his words. Inside was a hospital ID badge with her name and photo, not the standard issue maintenance badge she wore clipped to her uniform, but an official staff badge with Director of Patient Comfort Services printed beneath her name. I don't understand," she stammered, her English failing her in her confusion. I'm just the cleaning lady." Dr. Phillips shook his head firmly. "No. You're the woman who taught me that kindness matters more than anything else in medicine. You showed me what it means to truly care for another human being. And that's exactly what this hospital needs." Tears spilled freely down Teresa's weathered cheeks now, years of stoic silence breaking apart like ice in spring. "I thought no one remembered me," she whispered. "I didn't know I mattered." The silent spell that had fallen over the emergency room broke as a nurse began to applaud. Others joined in until the sound swelled around them like a wave. For the first time in 11 years, people were looking directly at Teresa Vargas, seeing her, acknowledging her presence, speaking her name. And for the first time since she had arrived in this cold northern city, so far from her home and family, Teresa felt that perhaps she had found where she belonged. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. Teresa sat nervously at her new desk, running her fingers along its smooth surface. The office was small, but had a window overlooking the hospital garden. A luxury she could never have imagined. Her new clothes felt stiff and foreign against her skin, a modest navy blue blazer and matching slacks that Dr. Phillips had insisted on purchasing for her first day. Business casual, he had called it, though to Teresa it felt like wearing someone else's skin. She had spent the past week in a whirlwind of paperwork and meetings, her head spinning with terms like patient advocacy and comfort care protocols. Each night she returned to her tiny apartment in disbelief, certain they would realize their mistake by morning. Yet each day her badge still worked, and people nodded respectfully as she passed. Today marked her first official day as Director of Patient Comfort Services, and Teresa had arrived 2 hours early, terrified of being late. She smoothed her hair, newly cut and styled at the insistence of Nurse Jenkins, who had suddenly taken a friendly interest in her and tried to quiet the voice in her head that kept whispering she didn't belong here. A knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice still small despite her efforts to sound confident. Dr. Phillips entered with a warm smile, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, placing one before her. "First day jitters?" Teresa nodded, grateful for his kindness but still uncomfortable with being treated as an equal by someone she had viewed as so far above her just days ago. "I don't know if I can do this, Dr. Phillips," she admitted. "I'm not educated. My English isn't perfect. What if I make a fool of myself, of you?" Ustin sat in the chair across from her desk, his expression serious. "Teresa, do you know why I created this position for you? Not out of gratitude, though I am grateful. I created it because you understand something that many highly educated doctors never learn." He leaned forward. "People need to feel seen, to feel that they matter. When I was a scared kid in that hospital bed, you didn't just tend to my physical needs. You saw me, really saw me. That's a gift." Teresa blinked back tears. "But I don't know how to teach others to do that," she protested weakly. Ustin smiled. "You won't have to teach, you'll show them. Just like you showed me." He stood up, straightening his white coat. "Your first committee meeting is at 10. Just be yourself, Teresa. That's exactly who we need." After he left, Teresa sipped her coffee and tried to calm her racing heart. How had her life changed so drastically in just 1 week? She thought of her son, Miguel, back in Mexico. He was 29 now, with children of his own, grandchildren she had never met except through pixelated video calls. All these years, she had sent most of her meager earnings back to them, promising that someday she would return. Now with her new salary, perhaps they could finally visit her here, or better yet, perhaps someday soon she could go home, not as a failure, but as a success. The thought gave her strength. She pulled a notepad toward her and began writing down ideas for her new program, drawing on 11 years of observing what patients really needed when they thought no one was watching. The committee meeting exceeded every one of Teresa's fears. 8 department heads sat around a polished conference table, all with advanced degrees and decades of experience. Dr. Phillips introduced her warmly, but she could read the skepticism on their faces. When invited to present her ideas, Teresa's carefully rehearsed speech evaporated from her mind. She stumbled through her first few sentences, her accent thickening with anxiety, until she noticed a silver-haired surgeon checking his watch impatiently. Humiliation crashed over her like a wave. She was making a fool of herself just as she had feared. But then from somewhere deep inside came her mother's voice. "Stand tall, mija. You are a Vargas." Teresa took a deep breath, set aside her notes and began to speak from her heart instead. "For 11 years, she said, her voice growing firmer, I have watched patients in this hospital. While I mopped floors, I saw the woman in room 302 cry every night because no one explained her diagnosis in words she could understand. I saw the old man in the East Wing, who never had visitors, and whose only comfort was when the night nurse took 5 minutes to hold his hand. I saw the young mother in the burn unit who couldn't reach her water glass, but was too afraid to ask for help because she didn't want to be a bother. The room had grown quiet now, all eyes fixed on her. These are small things, yes, but to the patient they are everything. They are dignity. They are humanity." Teresa continued, warming to her subject, laying out her vision for training volunteers to provide companionship and comfort measures, for creating multilingual explanation cards for common procedures, for establishing a system to record patients' personal preferences and cultural needs. As she spoke, she saw expressions change around the table, skepticism giving way to interest, and in some cases, respect. Dr. Leanne Morrison, the intimidating chief of surgery whom Teresa had previously only glimpsed from afar, was actually taking notes. When Teresa finally finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Dr. Morrison looked up from her notepad. "Ms. Vargas," she said, "where did you develop these concepts? They align remarkably well with the latest research on patient-centered care." Teresa felt her face flush. I don't know any research," she admitted. "I only know what I have seen." To her surprise, Dr. Morrison smiled, a rare occurrence based on the startled looks from others around the table. "Sometimes," the surgeon said, "observation is more valuable than data. I'd like to work with you on implementing the volunteer program." One by one, the other department heads offered support or resources. By the end of the meeting, Teresa had more allies than she could have imagined possible. As they filed out, Dr. Phillips hung back, beaming with poorly concealed pride. "See," he said quietly. "You belong here, Teresa, you always did. We just didn't know it yet." Later that afternoon, Teresa stood in the hospital lobby, watching a young woman struggle to navigate her wheelchair through the heavy main doors while balancing a sleeping infant in her arms. Without hesitation, Teresa rushed to hold the door, open, then offered to push the wheelchair to the waiting taxi. The woman's grateful smile warmed Teresa's heart, reminding her of why she had accepted this strange new role. As she walked back into the building, she noticed her reflection in the glass doors, a small woman in a navy blue blazer standing straighter than she had just a week ago. Perhaps, she thought, she could do this after all. Perhaps she truly did belong. But what will happen when the hospital discovers just how little I really know? Teresa wondered, the familiar doubt creeping back in like a shadow. Will they send me back to my mop and bucket? Will I disappear again? Teresa's second day began with a stack of reports on her desk about patient satisfaction metrics that made her head swim with unfamiliar terminology. She had barely begun attempting to decipher them when there was a knock at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Dr. Phillips with his now regular morning coffee. Instead, a tall, elegantly dressed woman entered. Dr. Victoria Nash, the BE hospital administrator, whom Teresa had previously only glimpsed from a respectful distance. Teresa shot to her feet, nearly knocking over her chair in the process. "Dr. Nash, please sit down," she stammered, gesturing to the chair across from her desk, while frantically trying to straighten the papers she had scattered in her surprise. Dr. Nash remained standing, her expression unreadable behind stylish glasses. "Ms. Vargas," she said coolly, "I understand Dr. Phillips created this position specifically for you." The way she emphasized specifically made Teresa's stomach knot with anxiety. Here it comes, she thought, the moment when they realize I don't belong. "Yes," Teresa admitted softly. "He was very kind." Dr. Nash nodded slowly. "Kindness is an admirable quality in a physician, but hospital administration requires more than kindness. It requires qualifications." Teresa felt heat rising in her cheeks. She looked down at her hands, still rough despite the expensive hand cream nurse Jenkins had given her, still bearing the small scars from years of work. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I will clear out my office today." To her surprise, Dr. Nash laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Clear out? No, Ms. Vargas, that's not why I'm here." She finally took the offered seat, crossing her legs with elegant precision. "I'm here because I've reviewed the minutes from yesterday's department head meeting. Your proposed initiatives are impressive, particularly coming from someone with no formal training in hospital administration." Teresa blinked in confusion. "You're not firing me?" Dr. Nash removed her glasses, suddenly looking less intimidating. "Firing you? Quite the opposite. I want to offer you resources. If you're serious about implementing these programs, you'll need a proper budget, a staff allocation, and, frankly, some education." Victoria Nash reached into her leather portfolio and extracted a brochure, sliding it across the desk to Teresa. "Chicago City College offers a certificate program in healthcare administration, 2 nights a week for 6 months. The hospital will cover the tuition, of course. Teresa stared at the brochure, then back at Dr. Nash, unable to process what was happening. "You want to send me to college?" she asked incredulously. Dr. Nash nodded. "Knowledge is power, Ms. Vargas. You already have something many administrators lack, genuine concern for patients and an understanding of their needs. Add some technical knowledge, and you could truly transform patient care at Chicago Memorial." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing. My grandmother was a cleaning woman at Cook County Hospital for 30 years. She would have been proud to see you in this office." After Dr. Nash left, Teresa sat in stunned silence, the college brochure clutched in her trembling hands. College, at her age, the very thought terrified her. She had left school after 6th grade to help support her family in Mexico. What if she couldn't understand the material? What if she failed and proved to everyone that Dr. Phillips had made a mistake? But beneath the fear, another emotion was growing, determination. If Dr. Nash believed she could do this, perhaps she could. Teresa pulled out her phone and dialed her son in Mexico. She needed to hear his voice. "Mama," Miguel answered warmly. "How is your fancy new job?" Teresa found herself pouring out everything, her fears, her insecurities, the college offer. When she finally paused for breath, Miguel's response was immediate. "Do it, Mama. Show them what Vargases are made of, and then send me a picture of you in one of those graduation hats. I'll frame it for your grandchildren." Teresa smiled through her tears. "What if I fail, mijo?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I fail?" she whispered again. Miguel's voice softened. "Mama, do you remember what you always told me when I was afraid to try something new? The only true failure is not trying. It's time you took your own advice." After hanging up, Teresa sat quietly, contemplating the path before her. Then, with a deep breath, she picked up her office phone and dialed the number on the brochure. "Yes," she said when someone answered. "I'd like to register for the Healthcare Administration Certificate Program." By the time she left work that evening, Teresa had completed her enrollment forms and received her student ID number. The college representative had sounded young, probably younger than Miguel, but had been patient and kind as Teresa carefully spelled out her information. "Classes start next Monday," the girl had told her. "Welcome to Chicago City College, Ms. Vargas." Walking to the bus stop that evening, Teresa felt as though she was floating between two worlds, the familiar world of mops and buckets and invisibility, and this strange new realm where people looked her in the eye and believed she was capable of more than she had ever imagined for herself. The weight of their expectations terrified her, but their belief was like oxygen to a flame she had thought long extinguished. As she waited for the bus that would take her back to her small apartment, Teresa noticed a young custodian pushing a cleaning cart through the hospital parking lot. The woman kept her head down, just as Teresa had done for so many years, making herself invisible to those who passed by. Without thinking, Teresa walked over to her. "Excuse me," she said gently. The woman looked up, startled that someone was addressing her directly. "What's your name?" Teresa asked. The young woman hesitated before answering. "Wendy." Teresa smiled and held out her hand. "I'm Teresa Vargas. I used to clean the East Wing before." She gestured vaguely toward the hospital building, still uncomfortable, claiming her new position. "It's nice to meet you, Wendy, really nice." The simple act of asking the woman's name, of acknowledging her existence, felt like closing a circle somehow. As Teresa boarded her bus a few minutes later, she made a mental note. Her new program would need to include all hospital staff, not just those who work directly with patients. Everyone deserved to be seen. The bus lurched into motion, carrying her toward an uncertain future that somehow, despite all her fears, felt full of promise. What Teresa couldn't have known was that somewhere in the hospital that very night, events were unfolding that would test her new position and her confidence in ways she could never have anticipated. The next morning, Teresa arrived at her office to find Dr. Phillips waiting for her, his usually cheerful face drawn with concern. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "A patient in the geriatric ward, Walter Simmons, 92 years old, no family. He's refusing all treatment and says he just wants to be left alone to die. The medical team is at a loss. Teresa set down her purse, confusion clouding her features. I'm sorry, Dr. Phillips, but why are you telling me this? I'm not a doctor or a therapist. What can I do? Ustin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Because for the past 3 days, the only person he's spoken a single word to is Wendy, the evening custodian. She mentioned it to her supervisor after you spoke to her yesterday, and he brought it to my attention. 30 minutes later, Teresa found herself on the 8th floor, standing outside the door of room 842. Inside, she could see an elderly man propped up in bed, staring vacantly out the window. His thin arms were mottled with bruises from IV attempts, and restraints lay unused, but visible on the bed rails, an indication that he'd been trying to remove medical equipment. Teresa knocked softly on the open door. "Mr. Simmons, may I come in?" The old man didn't turn his head, but his voice came clearly. "Are you another doctor here to tell me how to spend my last days?" There was no anger in his tone, only exhaustion. "No, sir," Teresa answered, entering the room but staying respectfully near the door. "I'm Teresa Vargas. I'd work with the hospital." Not quite a lie, but she wasn't ready to explain her complicated new position. Walter Simmons finally turned to look at her, his roomy blue eyes taking in her appearance. "You're not a doctor," he stated flatly. "No, sir." Teresa moved a step closer. "I heard you've been speaking with Wendy, the lady who cleans your room." A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps even warmth, crossed the old man's face. "Wendy, yes, good girl, reminds me of my Eleanor." Teresa seized on this opening. "Eleanor was your wife?" Mr. Simmons nodded, turning back toward the window. 57 years. She's been gone 12 now. Cancer. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Teresa moved closer still, finally taking a seat in the chair beside his bed. "Tell me about her," she said simply. And to her surprise, he did. For the next hour, Walter Simmons spoke more words than he had in the previous 3 days combined. He told Teresa about meeting Eleanor at a USO dance in 1948, about their small wedding, and the hardware store they'd run together for 40 years, about Eleanor's passion for gardening and how she could make anything grow. He spoke of their son who had died in Vietnam and how they had carried that grief together. As he spoke, his hands grew more animated, his voice stronger. Teresa listened intently, asking questions here and there, but mostly just letting him talk. When he finally fell silent, she noticed tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm ready to join her," he said quietly. "I've been ready for 12 years. Teresa reached out cautiously and placed her hand over his. "Mr. Simmons, Walter, I understand wanting to be with Eleanor again, but may I tell you what I see?" The old man looked at her curiously but didn't object. "I see a man with many stories still to tell, stories that might help other people who are suffering." She told him then about the new patient comfort program she was developing, about the need for volunteers who could sit with lonely patients, especially the elderly who had no visitors. "Someone like you," she concluded, "who understands loss and loneliness. You could make such a difference to someone else who's suffering." Walter stared at her for a long moment. "You want me to be a volunteer, here in the hospital at my age?" Teresa nodded. "Once you've recovered enough to go home, you could come back a few hours each week." For the first time, a ghost of a smile crossed Walter's face. Eleanor would have liked that idea, he admitted. She was always volunteering somewhere or other. He looked down at the IV he had been refusing. "I suppose I should let them put this back in then." Teresa smiled warmly. "I think that would be a good start." As she rose to leave, promising to return the next day, Walter called after her. "Ms. Vargas, thank you for seeing me." "Really seeing me? Most people just see a dying old man." Teresa paused in the doorway, thinking of all the times she had felt invisible. "Everyone deserves to be seen, Mr. Simmons. Everyone." Back in her office, Teresa called Dr. Phillips with the news. "He's agreed to resume treatment," she reported, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Ustin's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "I knew you could reach him. This is exactly why we needed you, Teresa, exactly why." The small victory with Walter Simmons gave Teresa a new confidence, as she prepared for her first college class the following Monday. She spent the weekend alternating between nervous anticipation and sheer terror, buying notebooks and pens with the care of a mother, preparing a child for the first day of school. When Monday evening arrived, she dressed in her most professional outfit, the navy blue blazer and slacks that were becoming her uniform, and took the bus to Chicago City College with her heart in her throat. The classroom was easy enough to find, but as she entered, Teresa felt immediately out of place. Most of the other students were in their 20s or 30s, busy with their phones or laptops, chatting comfortably with one another in the easy English of native speakers. Teresa chose a seat in the back corner, hoping to remain unnoticed, and carefully arranged her new notebook and pens on the desk. Just as she was considering fleeing before the class began, a voice beside her said, "First day jitters? Me too." She turned to find an African-American woman, perhaps a few years younger than herself, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm Denise Patterson, nurse manager at Lakeside Community Clinic." Teresa relaxed slightly at finding a fellow healthcare worker. "Teresa Vargas," she replied. "I work at Chicago Memorial." She deliberately kept her position vague, still uncomfortable claiming her new title. "Chicago Memorial, fancy," Denise commented with a low whistle. "What department?" Before Teresa could formulate a sufficiently vague answer, the instructor entered and called the class to attention. Professor Martin was a brisk, efficient woman who wasted no time with icebreakers or gentle introductions. Within minutes, she was deep into an explanation of healthcare organizational structures, using acronyms and terminology that made Teresa's head spin. By 20 minutes in, Teresa's notebook remained empty, save for a few attempted notes that she had crossed out in frustration. The words were flowing too fast for her to process, let alone translate and write down. Panic rose in her chest as she realized she was completely lost. This had been a terrible mistake. Dr. Phillips had been wrong about her. Dr. Nash had been wrong. She didn't belong here any more than she had belonged in that hospital committee meeting. As if sensing her distress, Denise slid a piece of paper toward her. At first, Teresa thought it was a note, but looking down, she saw it was a neatly organized outline of everything Professor Martin had covered so far. Denise winked at her and whispered, "I type fast. We can go over it together during the break." Tears pricked at Teresa's eyes at this small kindness from a stranger. When the class broke for 15 minutes halfway through, Teresa expected Denise to join the other students chatting by the vending machines. Instead, she pulled her chair closer to Teresa's. "First classes are always the worst," she said sympathetically. "The professor likes to weed out the weak ones early. It gets better. I promise." Teresa looked at her in surprise. "You've taken her classes before." Denise nodded. "This is my second certificate program. Did my patient care coordination certificate last year. Now I'm back for healthcare administration, so I can apply for the director of nursing position when my boss retires next year." She gestured toward Teresa's empty notebook. "Want to study together? I could use a study buddy." The kindness in her eyes reminded Teresa of her own mother, who had always found ways to help others, even when their family had so little. "I would like that very much," Teresa admitted. "But I should warn you, my English, sometimes I struggle with technical terms." Denise's smile widened. "Perfect. And I'm trying to improve my Spanish for our clinic's Latino patients. We can help each other." By the end of the 3-hour class, Teresa's head was still spinning, but the crushing sense of inadequacy had lifted somewhat. She and Denise exchanged phone numbers, agreeing to meet at the library on Thursday to prepare for their first assignment. As they walked out to the parking lot together, Denise asked again, "So, what do you do at Chicago Memorial? Nursing?" Teresa hesitated, then decided to trust this woman who had shown her such kindness. "I was a custodian there for 11 years, she said carefully. "But last week something happened. Now I am the Director of Patient Comfort Services. It's a new position." She expected surprise, perhaps even disbelief. Instead, Denise simply nodded. "That explains a lot," she said thoughtfully. "You've seen it all from the ground up, haven't you? That kind of perspective is worth more than 10 degrees." As they said their goodbyes, Teresa felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. Perhaps she had found not just a study partner, but a friend, something she hadn't had since leaving Mexico so many years ago. The bus ride home that night felt different somehow. As she looked out at the city lights, Teresa found herself noticing things she usually missed in her exhaustion. A young couple walking hand in hand, a street musician playing saxophone on a corner, the way the river reflected the skyscrapers above. For the first time in years, she felt fully awake, fully present in her life rather than merely enduring it. When she finally reached her apartment, Teresa called Miguel despite the late hour. "I did it, mijo," she said when he answered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I went to my first college class." Miguel's pride radiated through the phone. "I never doubted you for a minute, Mama. Not for 1 minute. Have you ever felt invisible in your workplace or community like Teresa did for so many years? Share your experience in the comments below." The next morning, Teresa approached her office with a new sense of purpose. The terror hadn't completely subsided, but it had been joined by something else: determination. She had survived her first college class. She had connected with Walter Simmons when the doctors could not. Perhaps Dr. Phillips had been right about her after all. As she rounded the corner, she spotted a group of people waiting outside her office door. A young nurse she recognized from the ER, an older gentleman in a patient's robe and wheelchair, and to her surprise, Dr. Leanne Morrison, the imposing chief of surgery. "Ms. Vargas," Dr. Morrison called out as soon as she spotted Teresa, "we've been waiting for you." The surgeon's tone was impossible to read, neither friendly nor hostile, but intensely focused. Teresa quickly unlocked her office, gesturing for them to enter, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "How can I help you?" she asked, looking from one face to another. The man in the wheelchair spoke first, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'm Howard Klein. Been stuck on the orthopedic floor for 2 weeks after hip replacement. These folks tell me you're the one to talk to about improving things around here." Teresa glanced at Dr. Morrison, whose expression remained neutral. "Mr. Klein has some concerns about his care," the surgeon explained carefully. "I suggested he might speak with you directly." Teresa nodded slowly, beginning to understand. Howard Klein was not just any patient. He was a hospital board member, according to the special notation on his patient bracelet. "No one tells you what's happening," Mr. Klein continued bluntly. "Doctors breeze in, mumble something about progress and physical therapy, then disappear. Nurses are too busy to answer questions, and don't get me started on the food." Teresa listened attentively, noting how the man's frustrations mirrored what she had observed for years from her invisible vantage point. When he finally paused for breath, Teresa turned to the young nurse who had remained silent throughout. "And why are you here, Miss Jenkins?" the nurse supplied. "Amy Jenkins. I work nights in orthopedics. I thought, well, I've been trying to implement some of the changes we discussed in the committee meeting, but I'm meeting resistance from the nursing supervisor." Teresa absorbed this information, suddenly aware that all 3 visitors were looking at her, expectantly. They were waiting for a solution, for leadership. The realization was terrifying. She was a woman who had cleaned floors for 11 years, with a 6th-grade education and 1 college class under her belt. Yet somehow, these educated professionals were looking to her for answers. Teresa took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words. "Stand tall, mija." She straightened in her chair and looked directly at Howard Klein. "Mr. Klein, would you be willing to help us solve this problem?" The man blinked in surprise. "Help you? How?" Teresa smiled. "By telling your story to other patients. By becoming part of our new Patient Advocacy Council." The words came to Teresa as she spoke them, the idea forming even as she articulated it. "What we need is communication between patients, staff, and administration, a formal channel where concerns are not just heard but addressed." She turned to Dr. Morrison. "With your permission, Dr. Morrison, I'd like to establish a council of current and former patients who meet regularly with representatives from each department, not just to voice complaints, but to help develop solutions." "Doctor, Morrison's expression remained neutral, but Teresa thought she detected a flicker of interest in her eyes. "And who would lead this council, Ms. Vargas?" Teresa didn't hesitate. "Nurse Jenkins and Mr. Klein to start, with my support, of course." Amy Jenkins looked startled, but pleased. Howard Klein narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "This council," he said slowly, "would need authority. Real authority to implement changes." Teresa nodded. "Which is why we need Dr. Morrison's involvement, and yours, as a board member." For a long moment, the room was silent as Teresa held her breath, wondering if she had overstepped. Then Dr. Morrison did something unexpected. She smiled. "Bold," she commented. "Very bold, Ms. Vargas. I like it." She turned to Howard Klein. "What do you say, Howard? Ready to put your complaints to constructive use?" The older man harumphed, but couldn't quite hide his interest. "Beats staring at the ceiling all day. I'm in." Within an hour, Teresa had drafted a preliminary proposal for the Patient Advocacy Council, with input from all three visitors. By the time they left her office, Howard Klein promising to recruit other board members, Dr. Morrison offering to present the proposal at the next executive meeting, and Nurse Jenkins bubbling with ideas for staff representation, Teresa felt both exhilarated and exhausted. She had just committed to creating an entirely new hospital entity, something far beyond her initial patient comfort ideas. What had she gotten herself into? As the door closed behind them, Teresa collapsed back into her chair, overcome by a wave of imposter syndrome. What if she failed? What if she couldn't deliver on these grand promises? What if everyone discovered she was just a cleaning lady playing at being an administrator? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her spiral of doubt. It was a text from Denise, her new friend from class. "How's your day going, healthcare warrior?" The simple message, with its implicit assumption that Teresa belonged in the healthcare world, steadied her. She typed back, "Creating a patient advocacy council, terrified, but excited." Denise's response came immediately, "That's my girl." Shaking. "Things up already. Remember, you've earned your seat at the table." Teresa smiled at the screen, grateful for this unexpected friendship. Then she straightened her blazer, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and began to outline everything she would need to make the council a success. If people believed in her, Dr. Phillips, Dr. Morrison, Denise, even Howard Klein in his gruff way, perhaps it was time she began to believe in herself. That evening, as Teresa prepared for her bus ride home, she detoured through the geriatric ward to check on Walter Simmons. She found him sitting up in bed, talking animatedly with a young doctor who was making notes on a tablet. "Ms. Vargas," Walter called out when he spotted her. "Come meet my new doctor. She actually listens. I think you'd approve." The young doctor, her name tag read Dr. Patel, smiled warmly at Teresa. "Mr. Simmons has been telling me about your conversation yesterday. Your patient comfort program sounds fascinating." Teresa felt a flush of pride that Walter had been talking about her ideas. After the doctor left, Walter confided, "I've been thinking about what you said about helping other patients. I have a suggestion." For the next 20 minutes, Walter outlined his vision for a senior companion program, pairing elderly volunteers with isolated patients, particularly those with dementia or cognitive decline. Eleanor volunteered with something similar at our church, he explained. It made such a difference to those folks just having someone there who wasn't in a hurry, who remembered what it was like to be young in the same era. Teresa listened, increasingly impressed by the thoughtfulness and detail of his proposal. "This is exactly what we need," she told him honestly. "Would you be willing to present these ideas to our new advocacy council once you're discharged?" Walter's eyes lit up. "You bet I would. Give me something to look forward to." Walking to the bus stop, Teresa marveled at how quickly things were changing. Just 2 weeks ago, she had been invisible, a shadow moving through the hospital corridors with her mop and bucket. Now she was creating councils, building programs, taking college classes. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. As she boarded the bus, her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Phillips. "Dr. Morrison told me about the Advocacy Council. Brilliant. Let's discuss tomorrow." Teresa smiled at the message, then gazed out the window as the bus pulled away from E. Chicago Memorial Hospital. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging when she looked at the imposing building, not as a ghost who haunted its corridors, but as someone who mattered, someone with the power to make things better. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. By day, Teresa worked on developing her patient comfort initiatives and preparing for the first meeting of the Advocacy Council. By night, she attended college classes or studied with Denise, struggling through assignments, but gradually beginning to understand the technical language of healthcare administration. The work was exhausting but exhilarating. For the first time in years, Teresa felt fully alive, challenged in ways that stretched her but didn't break her. Dr. Phillips checked in regularly, offering guidance and support, but increasingly stepping back to let her take the lead. "This is your program," he reminded her. "You have instincts about patient care that can't be taught in medical school." The first meeting of the Patient Advocacy Council exceeded all expectations. Held in the hospital's main conference room, it brought together an unusual mix of people: board members in expensive suits, doctors in white coats, nurses and technicians in scrubs, and most importantly, current and former patients eager to share their experiences. Teresa had worried that the medical professionals might dominate the conversation, but Howard Klein proved to be a formidable moderator, ensuring that every voice was heard. At the end of the 2-hour session, they had identified 3 immediate priorities: improving communication about treatment plans, addressing noise issues that disrupted sleep, and creating a more welcoming environment for patients' families. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Morrison lingered, watching as Teresa collected the notes and suggestions that had been recorded on large sheets of paper around the room. "You know," the surgeon said thoughtfully, "when Phillips first proposed this program, I was skeptical, thought it was another feel-good initiative that would look good in the annual report, but accomplish nothing substantive." Teresa paused in her work, cautious but curious. "And now?" Dr. Morrison's usually stern face softened slightly. "Now I think we may actually improve patient outcomes, which is all that matters in the end." Coming from the intimidating chief of surgery, it felt like the highest possible praise. Teresa ducked her head to hide the pleased flush that warmed her cheeks. "That's all I want too," she admitted, "to make things better for the patients." Later that evening, as Teresa prepared for her 3rd college class, she received an unexpected call from Dr. Nash, the hospital administrator. "Ms. Vargas, I've been hearing quite a lot about your activities these past 2 weeks," Dr. Nash said without preamble. Teresa's stomach tightened with anxiety. Had she overstepped, moved too quickly? "I hope that's a good thing," she ventured cautiously. There was a pause, and then Dr. Nash's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "It is indeed. The board is impressed, particularly Howard Klein, who is not easily impressed. In fact, they've approved an expanded budget for your department, effective immediately." Teresa nearly dropped the phone in shock. "Expanded budget," she echoed, faintly. "Yes," Dr. Nash confirmed. "You'll need to hire at least 2 full-time staff to help implement these initiatives. So I have taken the liberty of having HR prepare job descriptions based on your proposals. They'll be in your email by morning." After hanging up, Teresa sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed by the implications. She would be managing a team responsible for their work, their professional growth. The thought was terrifying. She, who had never managed anyone before, who had always been at the bottom of the hierarchy. Yet beneath the fear was a growing sense of excitement. She could hire people who shared her vision, who could help turn her ideas into reality, perhaps even Wendy, the custodian who had connected with Walter Simmons, or someone bilingual who could help address the needs of Spanish-speaking patients. The possibilities seemed suddenly endless. Her phone buzzed with a text from Denise. "Ready for Professor Martin's pop quiz tonight. Don't panic, I've got color-coded flashcards." Teresa smiled, grateful once again for this unexpected friendship that was helping her navigate the unfamiliar terrain of academia. By the time Teresa arrived on campus that evening, her initial panic had transformed into determination. She would master this material, build her team, make her program succeed, not just for herself but for all the invisible people in the hospital, the ones who cleaned and served and transported without recognition, and for the patients who felt lost and frightened in a system that too often treated them as cases rather than people. As she slid into her usual seat, Denise greeted her with a concerned look. "You okay? You look like you're about to face a firing squad." Teresa laughed, realizing her determination must have manifested as intensity. "I'm good," she assured her friend, "just thinking about some big changes at work." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Good changes?" Teresa nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Very good changes. I'll tell you all about it after class." The following Monday marked a significant milestone: Teresa's first hiring interviews. HR had screened applicants for her 2 new positions, Patient Experience Coordinator and Multilingual Patient Liaison, and scheduled the top candidates to meet with her. Teresa had spent the weekend preparing, researching best practices for interviewing with the same intensity she brought to her coursework. Still, as the first candidate arrived, a polished young woman with an impressive resume, Teresa felt woefully underprepared. Who was she to judge the qualifications of others when her own position had come through such unusual circumstances? But as the interviews progressed, Teresa found herself relying on the instincts that had served her well throughout her life. The standout candidate for the Patient Experience Coordinator role was surprising: a middle-aged man named Victor Ross, who had spent 20 years as a high school counselor before being treated at Chicago Memorial for a heart condition. "That experience changed me," he explained during his interview. "I saw how many patients felt lost, confused, afraid to ask questions. I thought, someone should fix this. Then I saw your job posting and realized maybe that someone could be me." His genuine empathy and practical ideas for improving patient education resonated deeply with Teresa. For the multilingual liaison position, Teresa was torn between 2 excellent candidates: a young Latina social worker with a public health background and a more experienced hospital administrator who spoke 4 languages. Both had compelling strengths, and Teresa found the decision agonizing. That evening, she called Dr. Phillips for advice, explaining her dilemma. "Trust your gut, Teresa," he told her simply. "Who will better understand what our patients need?" The answer, when framed that way, became clear. The next morning, Teresa made her offers: Victor Ross for Patient Experience Coordinator and Lucia Ramirez for Multilingual Patient Liaison. Both accepted immediately, and Teresa scheduled them to start the following Monday. As she hung up from the final call, a wave of emotion washed over her, pride mixed with disbelief. 3 weeks ago, she had been pushing a mop through these corridors. Now she was building a team to transform the hospital's approach to patient care. The journey seemed impossible, yet here she was, living it. Will I prove worthy of this trust, she wondered, or will I fail these people who are putting their careers in my hands? Patient Advocacy Council, Patient Experience Coordinator, Multilingual Patient Liaison, Dr. Victoria Nash listed, reading from her tablet as she paced Teresa's small office. "All this in less than a month. I'm impressed, Ms. Vargas, truly impressed." Teresa sat quietly, uncertain whether this unexpected visit from the hospital administrator was a good sign or a prelude to trouble. "Thank you," she replied cautiously. Dr. Nash stopped pacing and fixed Teresa with her penetrating gaze. "The question now is, what next? Where do you see this program? In 6 months, in a year?" The question caught Teresa off guard. She had been so focused on immediate needs that she hadn't articulated a long-term vision, even to herself. Drawing a deep breath, Teresa allowed herself to imagine what could be possible. "In 6 months," she began slowly, "I want every patient to have a clear understanding of their care plan in language they can understand. I want family members to feel welcomed as partners in healing, not visitors. I want staff at all levels to feel empowered to advocate for patients." As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, more confident. "In a year, I want Chicago Memorial to be recognized for its patient-centered approach. I want other hospitals to study our model, to learn from what we've built here. And I want us to be measuring tangible improvements, fewer complaints, better satisfaction scores, but most importantly, better health outcomes." Dr. Nash listened intently, then nodded once, decisively. Ambitious but achievable with the right resources. She tapped something on her tablet. The board has authorized an additional expansion of your budget, effective next quarter, and they'd like you to present at the annual Donor Gala in June. Teresa's eyes widened. The Donor Gala was the hospital's most prestigious event, where wealthy supporters gathered to hear about innovative programs worthy of their philanthropy. Me? She asked incredulously. Present to the donors? Dr. Nash actually smiled, a rare occurrence that transformed her usually stern face. You've become quite the story around here, Ms. Vargas, the cleaning woman who reinvented patient care. Our donors will eat it up. She said it without malice, simply stating a fact. And the funds you raise will allow you to expand these programs even further. After Dr. Nash left, Teresa sat motionless, absorbing this latest development. Present, to wealthy donors. Public speaking terrified her even in small groups. The thought of addressing a ballroom full of Chicago's elite made her physically ill. Yet if it meant securing resources to help more patients, to expand these programs that were already showing promise. Teresa reached for her phone and called. Denise, I need help, she admitted when her friend answered. Big presentation coming up. Need to learn how to speak in public without passing out. Denise laughed. Oh, honey, you've come to the right place. I used to teach communications before I went into nursing. We'll have you working that room like a pro. Teresa released a breath. She hadn't realized she was holding. What would I do without you? She asked, only half joking. Let's hope we never have to find out, Denise replied warmly. The following Monday brought another milestone, the arrival of Victor and Lucia, Teresa's first team members. She had arranged for them to share the small conference room adjacent to her office as a temporary workspace, while proper offices were being prepared. As they gathered for their first meeting, Teresa felt an unexpected surge of confidence. These people had chosen to join her team, to believe in her vision. She owed them leadership worthy of that trust. Welcome, she began, smiling warmly at both of them. Before we discuss specific projects, I want to share why this work matters to me. She told them then about her years as a hospital custodian, about feeling invisible, about observing the pain and confusion of patients who also felt unseen and unheard. Every person who walks through those hospital doors deserves dignity, she concluded. That's what we're really providing. Not just comfort, not just information, but the fundamental dignity of being truly seen. Victor and Lucia listened intently, and when Teresa finished, both seemed moved by her words. That's exactly why I wanted to join this team, Lucia said softly. Healthcare should be about people, not just procedures. Victor nodded in agreement. When I was a patient here, I felt like I'd lost my identity, like I was just a heart condition. In room 417, what you're describing would have made all the difference. The three of them spent the rest of the morning outlining immediate priorities and dividing responsibilities. By lunchtime, they had a working plan for their first month, focusing on 3 key initiatives: a multilingual patient education program, volunteer training for the Senior Companion project Walter had proposed, and a communication toolkit for clinical staff. As they broke for lunch, Teresa felt a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time in her professional life, she was part of a team working toward a shared vision, not just carrying out assigned tasks, but creating something meaningful together. She watched as Victor and Lucia headed to the cafeteria, already deep in conversation about volunteer recruitment strategies, and felt a swell of pride. These talented people were now part of her team. Her team. The concept still seemed surreal. Teresa was about to follow them when her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Phillips. Check your email. Great news. She pulled up her email to find a message from the hospital's communications department with a subject line that made her heart skip. Feature story. From custodian to healthcare innovator, Teresa Vargas transforms patient care at Chicago Memorial. The article, scheduled to run in the hospital's monthly newsletter and on their website, told Teresa's story with a warmth and respect that brought tears to her eyes. It described her years of dedicated service as a custodian, her rescue of young Ustin, and her rapid rise to create a groundbreaking patient advocacy program. There were quotes from Dr. Phillips, Dr. Morrison, and even Howard Klein, all praising her unique perspective and innovative approaches. The piece concluded with an announcement of her upcoming presentation at the Donor Gala, positioning her program as the future of patient-centered care. As Teresa read the article, emotions washed over her in waves: pride, disbelief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. People were watching now, believing in her, counting on her to succeed. She was about to close the email when her phone rang, Miguel calling from Mexico at an unusual hour. "Mama!" he exclaimed when she answered, his voice vibrating with excitement. "Why didn't you tell me?" Teresa frowned in confusion. "Tell you what, mijo?" "About the article," Miguel explained. "It's all over the hospital's social media. Vera from next door saw it and called to tell me." "Your mother is famous," she said. Teresa felt her face flush with embarrassment. "It's just a small article for the hospital newsletter," she protested weakly. "Not anymore," Miguel countered. "It's been shared hundreds of times already. People are calling you an inspiration." Before Teresa could process this information, Miguel continued excitedly. "And that's not even why I called. I have news too. We've been approved for tourist visas. All of us, me, Claudia, and the children, we're coming to visit you next month." Teresa nearly dropped the phone. Coming here to Chicago? She hadn't seen her son in 15 years, had never met her daughter-in-law or grandchildren except through video calls. The thought of holding them, of showing them her life here, it was almost too much to bear. "Are you sure you can afford it?" she asked worriedly. Ever practical despite her joy, Miguel laughed. "Don't worry about that. We've been saving since you told us about your new position. It's time the children met their extraordinary grandmother in person." Tears flowed freely down Teresa's cheeks now. "When?" she managed to ask. "We arrive May 12th. Is that okay? Can you get time off?" Teresa laughed through her tears. "Time off? Mijo, I have an office now, and a team. I can arrange my own schedule." The words felt strange and wonderful in her mouth, a reality she was still adjusting to. So after promising to call back that evening with more details, Teresa hung up and sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb everything that had happened in the past hour. The article, the social media attention, and most incredibly, her family's imminent visit. It was as if the universe had suddenly decided to reward her after years of hardship and invisibility. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered caution. What goes up must come down. Can this last? What if I cannot sustain this success? What if I disappoint everyone who now believes in me? Teresa pushed the doubts away, determined to focus on the positive. One day at a time, she reminded herself. Just as she had approached her years of cleaning, one corridor, one room, one floor at a time. She could do this. She would do this. For Miguel and his family, for Dr. Phillips who had given her this chance, and for herself, the self she was still discovering she could be. Just as Teresa was preparing to join Victor and Lucia in the cafeteria, there was a knock at her office door. She opened it to find Walter Simmons, dressed in street clothes rather than a hospital gown, leaning on a cane, but standing tall and dignified. "Mr. Simmons, you've been discharged," Teresa exclaimed, genuinely pleased to see him looking so much better than when she had first visited his room. Walter nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "As of this morning, and my first stop was to see you." He held out a small, tissue-wrapped package, a small token of my appreciation for giving an old man a reason to keep going. Touched, Teresa carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a beautiful fountain pen, clearly vintage but gleaming with care. "It was Eleanor's," Walter explained. "She was a writer, kept journals all her life. Seems fitting it should go to someone who's writing a new chapter for this hospital." Teresa blinked back tears as she carefully held the pen. "Mr. Simmons, I can't accept something so personal." Walter held up a hand to stop her. "Please, Eleanor would have loved knowing her pen was being used to create something meaningful. And speaking of creating..." He straightened, his expression becoming More businesslike. I'm ready to start working on that senior companion program whenever you are. I've already recruited 3 other old-timers from my retirement community who are eager to help. Teresa marveled at the transformation in the man who, just weeks ago, had been ready to give up on life. We're starting volunteer training next week, she told him with a smile. I'll have Lucia call you with the details. As Walter turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. You know, Ms. Vargas, when I first met you, I thought you were just another hospital administrator with a fancy title but no real understanding of what patients go through. He gave her a warm smile. I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life. After he left, Teresa sat at her desk, turning Eleanor's pen in her hands, deeply moved by the gift and all it represented. Then, with a sudden surge of inspiration, she pulled out her notebook, not her work planner, but the journal she had started keeping after her first college class, Denise's suggestion for processing all the changes in her life. Using Eleanor's pen, she began to write, Today I realized that invisibility can be a kind of superpower. For 11 years I watched and listened while no one watched me. Now I can use everything I learned to make a difference. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Victor's volunteer training program for the senior companions was wildly successful, with Walter Simmons emerging as a natural leader who inspired other retirees to join the cause. Lucia established a multilingual patient education initiative that was already showing promising results in improving treatment compliance among non-English-speaking patients. The Patient Advocacy Council was meeting regularly, generating valuable insights and practical recommendations that were being implemented across departments. Teresa's days were filled with meetings, planning sessions, and the countless details of building a program from scratch. Her evenings were divided between college classes, study sessions with Denise, and preparations for both the donor gala presentation and her family's visit. Despite her exhaustion, Teresa had never felt more alive. Each morning she woke with purpose, eager to continue the work that was already changing lives at Chicago Memorial. The hospital corridors that had once felt cold and intimidating now felt like home. People greeted her by name, not just her team and the administrators she worked with regularly, but nurses, technicians, even other custodians who had once been her colleagues. Word had spread about her unusual journey, and Teresa found herself becoming a symbol of possibility to others who had felt invisible within the system. If you could do it, maybe I can too, a young food service worker told her shyly one day in the cafeteria. I've been taking night classes in healthcare administration. Would you be willing to look at my resume sometime? These moments touched Teresa deeply, reminding her that her success could open doors for others. She began meeting informally with staff members who sought her advice, creating a sort of unofficial mentoring program that soon became one of her favorite aspects of her new role. You're building more than just a patient advocacy program, Denise observed one evening as they studied together in the college library. You're creating a whole community of care at that hospital. Teresa hadn't thought of it that way, but she realized her friend was right. The work had expanded beyond her initial vision, touching not just patients but staff at every level. I never planned any of this, she admitted. It just happened. Denise shook her head firmly. No, honey, you made it happen. There's a difference. May arrived, bringing warmer weather and mounting anxiety for Teresa. The donor gala was just 2 weeks away, and despite Denise's coaching, public speaking still terrified her. She had drafted and redrafted her speech dozens of times, practiced in front of mirrors, and recorded herself on her phone, but the thought of addressing hundreds of wealthy donors made her physically ill. What if they don't take me seriously? She confessed to Dr. Phillips during one of their weekly check-ins. I still sound like someone who cleaned floors for a living. Austin studied her with compassionate eyes. That's exactly why they will take you seriously, Teresa. Your authenticity is your strength. These donors hear polished presentations all the time. You'll offer them something different, something real. Teresa wasn't convinced, but she continued her preparations, determined not to let her fear undermine the opportunity to secure funding for her programs. Meanwhile, she was also busy preparing for Miguel's visit, cleaning her small apartment obsessively, purchasing an inflatable mattress for her grandchildren, stocking the refrigerator with foods she thought they might enjoy after their long journey from Mexico. The dual pressure of the upcoming gala and family visit left her feeling constantly on edge, prone to waking in the night with her heart racing and her mind churning with all that could go wrong. What if I freeze during my speech? What if my grandchildren don't like me? What if Miguel is disappointed in the life I've built here? Would you have ever thought that one day a cleaning woman would worry about giving speeches to wealthy donors, or whether her executive son would approve of her modest apartment? On May 10th, just 2 days before Miguel's scheduled arrival and 4 days before the gala, disaster struck. Teresa woke with a fever and chills, her throat raw and her head pounding. By noon she could barely stand, and Victor insisted on driving her to urgent care. The diagnosis was swift and unwelcome, severe strep throat, requiring bed rest and antibiotics. At least 3 days of complete rest, the doctor instructed firmly. No work, no stress, no talking, if you can avoid it. Teresa protested weakly, her voice already reduced to a painful whisper. But my family, coming from Mexico, and the gala presentation. The doctor was unmoved. If you don't rest now, you won't have a voice at all for either event. Your choice. Victor drove her home and helped her into bed, promising to coordinate with Lucia to cover her essential responsibilities. Don't worry about anything, he assured her. Just focus on getting better. But as she lay in her darkened bedroom, watching messages accumulate on her silenced phone, Teresa felt panic rising. Everything she had worked for over the past 2 months seemed suddenly precarious. What if her illness was interpreted as failure? What if the momentum of her programs was lost in her absence? What if she couldn't recover in time for Miguel's arrival? Or worse, what if she infected her family after they had traveled so far to see her? By evening, her fever had spiked again, and with it, her fears. In her half-delirious state, Teresa began to wonder if the universe was punishing her for rising above her station, for daring to believe she could be more than just a cleaning woman. The next morning, Teresa woke to the sound of someone in her kitchen. Alarmed, she struggled to sit up, then relaxed as Denise's familiar voice called out, "Don't get up, it's just me." Moments later, her friend appeared in the bedroom doorway carrying a tray with tea, toast, and medication. "Victor called me," Denise explained, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Thought you could use some help." Teresa tried to speak, winced at the pain, and instead reached for her phone to type a message. "You didn't have to come, you have work." Denise read it and shrugged. "Took a personal day. Now drink this tea with honey and take your antibiotics. Doctor's orders." Too weak to argue, Teresa complied, allowing herself to be cared for in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving her mother's home in Mexico decades ago. Throughout the day, Denise tended to Teresa with quiet efficiency, changing sweat-soaked sheets, preparing simple foods that her irritated throat could tolerate, making sure she took her medication on schedule. Between these ministrations, she kept Teresa updated on developments at the hospital, reading aloud encouraging messages from Victor, Lucia, and Dr. Phillips. "Everyone just wants you to get better," Denise assured her. "The programs are running smoothly. Your team is handling everything." By evening, Teresa's fever had finally broken, though her throat still burned and her body ached with fatigue. As Denise prepared to leave, promising to return in the morning, Teresa managed to whisper, "Why are you doing all this for me?" Denise paused at the bedroom door, her expression softening. "Because that's what friends do, Teresa, real friends, and because someday when I'm going through something tough, I know you'll be there for me too." After Denise left, Teresa lay, awake for a long time, reflecting on her friend's words and actions. In her 15 years in Chicago, she had never experienced friendship like this, unconditional support without expectation of return. It reminded her of home, of the close-knit community in her small Mexican town, where neighbors cared for one another as family. Somehow, without quite realizing it, she had begun to create that same sense of community here, first through her work at the hospital, and now in her personal life. The realization brought tears to her eyes. Perhaps this was the true measure of her success, far more meaningful than titles or recognitions, the ability to forge genuine human connections after years of isolation and invisibility. The next morning, Teresa woke feeling significantly better. Her throat still hurt, but the fever had not returned, and she found she could speak in a raspy whisper without excruciating pain. Denise arrived early with breakfast and fresh flowers, along with updated reports from the hospital. Victor and Lucia have everything under control, she assured Teresa, and Dr. Phillips has arranged for a car to pick up your family from the airport tomorrow, if you're still not well enough. The relief Teresa felt at this news was profound. Her team was proving capable in her absence, exceeding her expectations. She had chosen well, trusted well. And the gala, she whispered anxiously. Denise smiled reassuringly. Still 4 days away. Your voice should be much better by then, but even if it's not perfect, Dr. Phillips says they can provide a microphone. With extra amplification, you're giving the speech, Teresa, period. By late afternoon, Teresa felt strong enough to sit in her living room, going through some work emails while Denise cleaned the already spotless apartment in preparation for Miguel's arrival. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, startling both women. "Are you expecting someone?" Denise asked. Teresa shook her head, puzzled. Denise opened the door to reveal Dr. Phillips and Dr. Morrison standing in the hallway, bearing gift bags and concerned expressions. "We came to check on our patient advocacy guru," Ustin explained as they entered, "and to deliver some chicken soup from the hospital cafeteria, the chef's special recipe." Dr. Morrison, looking strangely out of place in Teresa's modest apartment, in her elegant pantsuit, added gruffly, "And to assure you that your programs are functioning admirably in your absence. You've built a strong foundation, Ms. Vargas." Teresa was deeply touched by their visit. Not just the hospital's rising star, Dr. Phillips, whose connection to her was well known, but the formidable Dr. Morrison, who had no obligation to concern herself with Teresa's health. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still weak but her heart full, "for everything." After they left, promising to handle any hospital emergencies so she could focus on her recovery and her family's visit, Teresa turned to Denise with tears in her eyes. "I never expected any of this," she admitted. 2 months ago, no one would have noticed if I disappeared entirely." Denise squeezed her hand gently. "You're seeing the ripple effects of your own kindness, Teresa. All those years you thought no one was watching. You were teaching everyone around you what compassion looks like. Now it's coming back to you." The next morning, May 12th, Teresa woke early, her heart racing with anticipation and nervousness. Miguel and his family would arrive today, and though her voice was improving, she still tired easily and worried about being a proper hostess. Denise had promised to come by in the afternoon to help prepare a welcome dinner, but for now Teresa was alone with her thoughts. She stood in front of the small mirror in her bathroom, studying her reflection. The woman who gazed back at her seemed different somehow from the Teresa who had pushed a mop through hospital corridors for so many years. She stood straighter, her eyes clearer, more confident. The navy blazer that had once felt like a costume now seemed to belong on her shoulders. By mid-morning, Teresa felt strong enough to tidy the apartment one final time, arranging fresh flowers in the center of her small dining table and placing framed photos of Miguel and his family throughout the living room. Her throat still hurt when she swallowed, but her voice was returning, albeit raspy and weak. She rehearsed what she would say when she finally saw her son after 15 long years of separation, but no words seemed adequate for the emotion welling inside her. At noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Phillips. "Car service confirmed for airport pickup at 3:15. Driver will bring them directly to your apartment. Rest your voice and enjoy your family." The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Teresa alternated between sitting perfectly still on her sofa and frantically rechecking every detail of her preparations. At 2 o'clock, Denise arrived carrying grocery bags filled with ingredients for a celebration dinner. "You sit," she ordered, pointing firmly to the sofa. "I'll handle the kitchen. Save your voice and your energy for your family." Teresa obeyed gratefully, watching as her friend moved efficiently through the small kitchen. preparing enchiladas and frijoles using recipes Teresa had shared during their study sessions. The familiar smells of home soon filled the apartment, bringing tears to Teresa's eyes. How had she found such a friend after so many years of isolation? At 4:30, Teresa's phone buzzed again. A text from Miguel. "Just landed in the car now. See you soon, Mama." Teresa's heart leapt into her throat. After 15 years of phone calls, video chats and letters, her son was finally coming home to her. Denise squeezed her hand in silent support, understanding without words the magnitude of this moment. 20 minutes later, a soft knock sounded at the door. Teresa froze, suddenly paralyzed with emotion. Denise gave her a gentle push. "Go on," she whispered. "They're waiting." On shaking legs, Teresa crossed to the door and pulled it open. Miguel stood in the hallway, taller and broader than she remembered, his boyish face now that of a mature man with flecks of grey at his temples. Beside him stood a beautiful woman with kind eyes, Claudia, the daughter-in-law Teresa had only met through video screens. And in front of them, two children with wide, dark eyes, Teresa's grandchildren, Emilio and Luciana, 8 and 6 years old. For a long moment, everyone stood motionless, taking in the reality of each other's presence after so many years of separation. Then Miguel whispered, "Mama," and stepped forward to fold Teresa into his arms. The dam broke. Tears flowed freely as Teresa clung to her son, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the physical reality of him after so many years of absence. The evening that followed was one of the happiest of Teresa's life. Despite her weakened voice, she managed to converse with her family, marveling at how quickly the children overcame their initial shyness, eager to explore her apartment and show her the gifts they had brought from Mexico. Denise stayed to help serve the dinner she had prepared, then discreetly excused herself, promising to return the next day. As the door closed behind her, Miguel turned to his mother with curious eyes. "Who is she, Mama? You never mentioned such a close friend in our calls." Teresa smiled, realizing how much had changed in her life in recent months. "She is new," she explained, "like so many things in my life now." Later, after the children had fallen asleep on the inflatable mattress Teresa had purchased for them, she sat at her small kitchen table with Miguel and Claudia, telling them the full story of her transformation from hospital custodian to program director. She showed them the article from the hospital newsletter, now framed on her wall alongside her first college assignment, which had earned an A- to her immense pride. She explained about the donor gala still to come, trying to convey both her anxiety about public speaking and her determination to secure funding for her programs. "I'm still afraid," she admitted in her raspy voice, "that they will see me and think, just a cleaning woman. What does she know?" Miguel listened intently, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. When Teresa finally fell silent, he reached across the table to take her hand. "Do you remember, Mama, when I was 12 and wanted to quit school to work in the fields with my friends? Do you remember what you told me?" Teresa nodded, the memory clear despite the passing years. "I said that education was the one thing no one could ever take from you, that with knowledge comes respect." Miguel nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "You worked so hard to keep me in school, sacrificed everything to come here so you could send money home for my education. And now look at us both. You, the hospital director, me, the bank manager. You taught me by example, Mama. You still are." The next few days passed in a blur of joy as Teresa showed her family around Chicago, introducing them to Denise, Dr. Phillips, and her team at the hospital. Her voice grew stronger each day, and by the night before the gala, she could speak, almost normally, though she still tired easily. That evening, as Miguel helped her practice her speech one final time in her living room, he surprised her with a gift, a beautiful silk blouse in a deep, rich blue. "For tomorrow," he explained, "to match your blazer." Claudia added, "And I've arranged for a friend who is a stylist to come in the morning to do your hair and makeup. You will shine, Mama Teresa." Touched beyond words, Teresa embraced them both, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in such a short time, from invisible to celebrated, from alone to surrounded by love. The night of the donor gala arrived with perfect spring. Weather, clear skies and gentle breezes that seemed to promise good things ahead. Teresa stood in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, scarcely able to believe that she belonged in such opulent surroundings. The room glittered with crystal chandeliers, fine china, and wealthy donors in evening wear. Miguel and Claudia stood beside her, having arranged for a neighbor to watch the children, determined to support her on this important night. Dr. Phillips approached, handsome in a tuxedo, to introduce Teresa to key donors before the formal program began. Despite her nervousness, Teresa found herself able to converse with these powerful people with unexpected ease, drawing on the confidence she had built over the past months. "You're a natural," Dr. Nash commented as she passed by in an elegant black gown. "Hard to believe you were ever afraid of these people." Teresa smiled gratefully, taking strength from the hospital administrator's approval. When dinner concluded and the program began, Teresa sat at the head table with the hospital's leadership, her family proudly watching from a nearby table. The hospital's president gave a brief welcome, followed by Dr. Phillips, who introduced Teresa with warm words about her journey and the innovative programs she had created. And then it was time. Teresa approached the podium, her heart hammering in her chest but her steps steady. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "Good evening," she began, her voice clear despite its lingering raspiness. "My name is Teresa Vargas. For 11 years I cleaned the floors of Chicago Memorial Hospital while dreaming of a better life for my son in Mexico." She paused, finding Miguel's supportive gaze in the crowd. "I thought I was invisible, just a woman with a mop who no one really saw. What I didn't realize was that all those years of invisibility gave me a special kind of vision, the ability to see what others missed." Teresa continued, describing the patient experiences she had witnessed, the small kindnesses that made enormous differences, the gaps in care that her programs were now addressing. As she spoke, she felt her nervousness fade, replaced by the passion that had driven her work these past months. "When Dr. Phillips found me scrubbing floors and offered me the chance to lead this program, he gave me more than a job," Teresa said, her voice gaining strength. "He gave me the opportunity to transform invisibility into insight, hardship into hope." She outlined the initiatives her team had implemented: the Patient Advocacy Council, the Senior Companion Program, the multilingual education materials, and the measurable improvements they had already documented in patient satisfaction and outcomes. "But this is just the beginning," she concluded, her gaze sweeping across the room. "With your support, we can expand these programs to touch more lives, to ensure that every patient who enters Chicago Memorial feels truly seen, truly heard, truly cared for, not just their illnesses but their humanity." As Teresa stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause, not the polite, measured applause of obligation, but the genuine, enthusiastic response of people deeply moved. Dr. Phillips rose to his feet, followed quickly by Dr. Morrison, Dr. Nash, and finally the entire room. Teresa stood in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the standing ovation, searching the crowd until she found Miguel's face, tears streaming down his cheeks as he applauded his mother's triumph. In that moment, Teresa understood that she had finally, truly arrived, not just at a career milestone or a position of respect, but at the full realization of her own worth. The invisible woman had become not only visible, but luminous, shining with the light of her own inherent dignity. Later that evening, as the gala concluded, the hospital president approached Teresa with news that left her speechless. Donations specifically earmarked for her programs had exceeded all expectations, more than tripling her department's budget for the coming year. "You've inspired our donors, Miss Vargas," he told her with genuine respect. "They want to be part of what you're building here." As Teresa, Miguel, and Claudia rode home in the car the hospital had provided, they sat in wondering silence, still, processing the magnitude of the evening's success. "I always knew you were extraordinary, Mama," Miguel said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But tonight, everyone else discovered it too." The following week, Miguel's family's last in Chicago before returning to Mexico brought more surprises. Dr. Nash called Teresa to her office to offer her a larger workspace for her expanding team and to discuss the creation of a training program based on Teresa's approach to patient advocacy, a program that could potentially be shared with other hospitals nationwide. Walter Simmons, now fully recovered and leading the thriving Senior Companion program, introduced Teresa to a documentary filmmaker interested in capturing the story of Chicago Memorial's transformation. And perhaps most surprisingly, Teresa received an invitation to speak at a national healthcare conference in the fall, with all expenses paid by the hospital. "It's happening so fast," Teresa confessed to Denise during their study session, the night before Miguel's family was scheduled to depart. "Sometimes I wake up in the night convinced it's all a dream, that tomorrow I'll be back pushing a mop through empty corridors." Denise studied her friend's face with understanding eyes. "That's normal," she assured Teresa. "Success is as disorienting as failure, especially when it comes suddenly. But you've earned this, Teresa. All of it." Teresa nodded, trying to absorb her friend's certainty. "And you're not alone anymore," Denise added gently. "You have your team, your friends, your family, both here and in Mexico. You've built a community around you, just as you've built these programs at the hospital. That's your real achievement." On Miguel's last morning in Chicago, he presented Teresa with another surprise: papers for a small house in her hometown in Mexico. "It's yours," he explained, as she stared at the documents in confusion. "Paid for with the money you sent us all these years. So when you're ready to retire, you can come home to us." Teresa clutched the papers to her chest, overcome with emotion. "But that money was for your education, for the children," Miguel shook his head firmly. "We saved some of it, invested it. This house is the result of your sacrifice, Mama, a place for you to return to when you're ready." Teresa embraced her son, unable to speak through her tears. The cleaning woman who had once felt she had no real home, not in Mexico, which she had left, nor in Chicago, where she had never fully belonged, now had two places where she was truly wanted, truly valued. The airport goodbye was painful, but different from the parting 15 years earlier. Then it had felt like an ending, a severing. Now it felt like a comma, not a period, a pause in an ongoing story. "We'll be back at Christmas," Miguel promised as they stood at the security checkpoint. "And next time you must bring Denise to meet the rest of the family in Mexico." Teresa nodded, already looking forward to the reunion. "And who knows," Claudia added with a knowing smile. "Perhaps by then you'll have more news to share." She glanced meaningfully at Dr. Phillips, who had insisted on driving them all to the airport in his car. Teresa blushed furiously at the implication, while Ustin suddenly became very interested in checking his phone. Miguel laughed at their mutual discomfort. "Subtle, Claudia," he teased his wife, then kissed his mother one final time. "Be happy, Mama. You deserve it." After the plane departed, Teresa and Ustin walked slowly back to the parking garage, a comfortable silence between them. "Thank you for driving us," Teresa said finally. "It meant a lot to Miguel to meet you properly." Ustin nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's a remarkable man. You raised him well despite the distance." They reached his car and paused before getting in. "What now?" Ustin asked quietly. "After all this excitement, family visit, successful gala, program expansion, what does Teresa Vargas want for herself?" The question caught her off guard. For so many years, she had wanted only survival, only to provide for Miguel and his family. Personal desires had seemed like impossible luxuries. Now, standing in the airport parking garage on this beautiful May afternoon, Teresa allowed herself to consider the question seriously. "I want to finish my certificate program," she began slowly. "I want to expand our initiatives at the hospital. I want to see my grandchildren grow up, even if from a distance." She paused, then added with newfound certainty, "And I want to remember who I was and honor her, the woman with the mop who did her work with love even when no one was watching, because without her, I wouldn't be here now." Ustin's expression softened as he reached out to take her hand. "She's still part of you, Teresa, the best part, the foundation on which everything else is built." Teresa nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. The cleaning woman had not disappeared. She had transformed like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, still herself, but with brilliantly expanded possibilities. In the months that followed, Teresa's programs flourished beyond even her ambitious hopes. The Patient Advocacy Council became a model studied by hospitals across the country. The Senior Companion Program expanded to include volunteers of all ages, creating intergenerational connections that benefited both patients and volunteers. Teresa completed her certificate, program with honors, supported every step of the way by Denise, who had become not just a study partner but a cherished friend. Victor and Lucia grew into their roles with creativity and dedication, allowing Teresa to focus increasingly on the strategic vision for patient-centered care throughout Chicago Memorial. But despite her growing professional success, Teresa never forgot the lessons of her years of invisibility. She learned every custodian's name and made a point of acknowledging their essential contributions to patient care. She championed a hospital-wide wage increase for support staff, arguing persuasively that dignity at work began with a living wage. She started a scholarship fund for hospital employees seeking further education, named in honor of her mother, who had sacrificed so much for Miguel's schooling. And every Monday morning, without fail, she spent an hour walking the hospital corridors, not as a director but as an observer, watching and listening with the same careful attention that had informed her work for 11 years. On one such Monday, almost a year after Dr. Phillips had first approached her as she mopped the emergency room floor, Teresa paused outside room 842, Walter Simmons's old room. Now it was occupied by a young woman recovering from a difficult childbirth, her tiny premature infant in the NICU, several floors away. Teresa had noticed the woman's distress during previous walks, had seen how she struggled to communicate with the primarily English-speaking staff. Today, Teresa noticed something different, a senior companion sitting beside the woman's bed, holding her hand and speaking to her in fluent Spanish. The elderly volunteer was showing the new mother how to use the tablet the hospital now provided to connect remotely with the NICU, allowing her to see her baby even when she was too weak to visit in person. Teresa stood in the doorway, unnoticed by either woman, and felt a profound sense of completion. This was why she had been given this extraordinary opportunity, not for titles or recognition, but for moments like this. Moments when human connection bridged the gaps that medicine alone could not address. As she watched, the young mother's face transformed from despair to hope, a smile breaking through her tears as she glimpsed her tiny daughter on the screen. The senior companion, one of Walter's recruits, Teresa now recognized, spoke gentle words of encouragement, the universal language of motherhood transcending differences in age and background. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said softly beside her. Teresa turned to find Dr. Phillips, Justin as she now called him in their increasingly personal off-duty hours, watching the scene with the same appreciation she felt. "This is what healing really looks like," Teresa agreed. "Not just medicine, but humanity." They stood together in companionable silence, observing the quiet miracle unfolding in room 842. Then Teresa straightened her shoulders and smiled up at the man who had first seen her potential. "Ready for our meeting with the board? I have some new ideas to propose." Justin's answering smile was warm with admiration and something deeper, something still unfolding between them, with patient, careful tenderness. "Lead the way, Ms. Vargas. I'm right behind you." As they walked together down the corridor Teresa had once cleaned in solitude, heads nodding respectfully as they passed, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year, from invisibility to recognition, from isolation to community, from survival to purpose. The hospital that had once been merely her workplace had become the setting for her most meaningful contribution to the world. And the woman who had once whispered to herself, "Do it with love even if no one sees it," now understood the profound truth that love, offered without expectation of return, eventually circles back, multiplied beyond measure. Congratulations! Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.